Well, today I wanted to go on a hike, but it's raining outside. I might go later. It's in the upper 30s and supposed to get up into the upper 40s today. And I thought that I would share some information on my family. Ian's Thanksgiving was coming up, and I had in the past listened to a gentleman talk about the Pilgrims, the Congregationalists, the Puritans. He did mention that the Puritans were the Taliban of the religious community during that time, and he wasn't a religious um, commentator. This was just talking about Thanksgiving, which is coming up right around the corner. And I thought it would be interesting to share a little bit of what I've learned over the last 15 years or so, and which was kind of highlighted when I took my DNA test, and it had circled two different areas over the Connecticut and Massachusetts, New York area. There were two different circles. And I have come to learn that both of my father's side and my mother's side both came to the U.S. as Puritans during the Puritan migration, which happened in between the 1620s and 1640s out of England. And growing up, I was told that it was all related to the desire for freedom of religion and stuff. I'm not too certain now that it wasn't more of a desire for England to get rid of a bunch of extremists. And the U.S. certainly wasn't colonized by a group of prison inmates that were sent over to the U.S. They may have. There were lots of different communities and stuff that came to the U.S. The Pilgrims, the Congregationalists, the Puritans, all had different viewpoints. In fact, in reading I think it's my seventh great grandfather's book, um, The Redeemed Captive, The Return to Zion, you'll find out some of the mentality about how the Puritans were going to create their new Zion, their new spiritual home in the U.S., the freedom to create whatever they wanted to create. That wasn't exactly what happened, but anyway. Going back in to my family, Robert Williams was the person that had originally brought my family to the U.S. And he was born in 1608 to Stephen, I think, and Margaret Williams. He had left home and went down to England or to a different area in 1623. He left home. And then what was kind of fascinating to me in a certain way is that they had referred to the fact that he may have been leaving home in order to get away from the Black Plague that was going on. Stephen and Margaret, eventually, his parents, would die from the Black Plague, which was the bubonic plague. I didn't actually know that I had a relationship to the Black Plague. And I have part of it down here on my phone or whatever, so we're looking at it on occasion or whatever. He took on, or was taken on by an apprenticeship in the in the um, making shoes and leather. I guess I remember. Yeah. Anyway, after his 7 years, he actually spent a couple more years, and one of his brothers came up there and took on an apprenticeship with him. In 1637, he had married, I guess, Elizabeth, and they had 4 kids. He also had 2 other, says servants, but they were both young women that were Williamses. So I don't exactly know what his relationship to them. I guess it was Mary Williams, which was 18, and Annie Williams, which was 15. And in 1637, I guess April of 1637, he had kind of made an application to go to the Americas, which kind of makes you wonder what was going on in their life or whatever, that he would be willing to pull up stakes in 1637. And I understand that that was part of the Puritan migration, and he must have been probably most likely deeply involved in the Puritan religion. King James Bible. Yes, the King James Bible that I used to look at sitting on the pew at church and always wondering why did it say the version. I couldn't understand why did it say Bible, the version, King James version of the Bible. I would later find out why. Anyway, in 1637, he had made an application to go to America and pull up his family, which included 7 other people, his wife, his 4 kids. Let me see, is that 7? Yeah, his wife, his 4 kids, and 2 maid servants or whatever that he had in the house. He would, in fact, do that. There was a ship called the Rose. The Rose sailed to America and arrived in Boston on June the 8th of 1637. I had checked, and there was only one sailing of the Rose during 1637. So they had to have been on that sailing. You have to remember back then that taking that endeavor would have been just so daunting because it took several months to cross. You were in a cramped ship with lots of other people. Starvation and famine, in fact, could be part of it. Their food sources often were contaminated by, rodents and seawater, and in order to take on that type of you wonder what led to that, and probably a portion of it, I don't know, but a portion of it was probably the Black Plague, in which his parents died in. He would arrive in Boston in June the 8th of 1637. And over the course of his life, he had actually a pretty prosperous life. If you go back and look, in some of his, which would have been my family, he had a son called Samuel, and Samuel was my 8th great grandfather, which he would later have a son called John Williams, which is the one that had written the book, The Redeemed Captive, The Return to Zion. But going back to Robert, Robert, his descendants would eventually become, one of them would actually sign the Declaration of Independence. And there's a whole host, if you go down through how that single decision that he made in 1637 to come to the Americas would affect the outcome of America. He actually signed the charter for I think it's the Roxbury School, which was just a part of Boston, and how that is the longest running, oh sheesh, what do they call it? Anyway, the longest running, um, not primary, but the longest running continuous running school in the U.S. I think it was founded in 1645. Actually, at the time, I don't think it is anymore, but it could be. But it was a male-only school. And he would eventually have 135 acres in that area. Originally, when he came, he had to build a small little house for them to live in, extremely small, but eventually was able to become a person of notoriety in the community. And go on to have a fairly successful life or whatever. Samuel, his son, I have not got into that as much, but him and his wife, Samuel and his wife, would eventually have a son called John Williams. John Williams wrote the book The Redeemed Captive, The Return to Zion. To go back and share a little bit of what that Thanksgiving must have been like in the fall of 1637. It was a different event than the first Thanksgiving and what I was taught Thanksgiving was about. I'm going to read a little bit about that first Thanksgiving in 1637, if I can get back to it. The Thanksgiving in 1637, it says that John Winthrop proclaimed a day of Thanksgiving on September the 8th of 1637. The reason for the day was somewhat a little bit different than the original Thanksgiving. It says that the proclamation was given for a day of Thanksgiving in order to give thanks to God for the return of a military operation, for the safe return of the soldiers. You got to wonder what that meant. The unfortunate thing is that they had gone out and killed a group of Paraguay men, women, and children. And it had also said that it was a different day of Thanksgiving from the. It says this day of Thanksgiving was proclaimed shortly after the Mystic Massacre, where English settlers and their allies killed more than 400 Paraguay men, women, and children in what is now Connecticut. So the Thanksgiving celebration that my family would have came to in 1637 wasn't sitting down with the Native Americans and having a feast. It was a day celebrating the death of 400 Paraguay men, women, and children in the Connecticut area. And giving thanks to God for the safe return of their soldiers. In a lot of ways, I guess it will always be a day of remembrance for me, for those families of the Paraguay people that did not have a chance to grow up and be successful in the land in which they were born. But it is interesting that in 1637, um, my father's side anyway, that would have been their first Thanksgiving. I know my mother's side came into the U.S. as part of the Puritan migration a few years before that. So by that time, they would have spent a couple of Thanksgivings in the Americas.